we look at the veterans who serve in Parliament, and they are, generally the ones who are, upstanding members of the House. They're not ones getting into mischief and getting into trouble and splashed all over the papers. Why? Because they've got a core set of values that they stick to, that they developed in the military.
Today is quite a special episode because I'm recording from the comfort of my parents' home in the Garden of England with a good friend of mine who's a local boy, and that is Stephen James.
Thank you, Jonny. Thank you for welcoming me to the podcast.
Well, finally.
I feel like I'm at the bottom of a long list of people who have gone before, but an illustrious list.
Bit rude, really. I've saved you till sort of quite a far, on the 8th season now, the podcast. So, and you've been a massive supporter.
Yeah, huge.
We obviously share a same cap badge with the Intelligence Corps, and that's how we met, through the Intelligence Corps family. And since then, we've become good mates.
That's right, yeah.
But so I've already preluded into that. You did serve the Intelligence Corps. You are a former teacher. You work within the education sector. You also are a keen Conservative activist. You stood for local election. You're on the parliamentary candidates list. It goes on and on and on. What are you up to at the moment?
I tell you what, it's licking my wounds from the local elections, to be quite honest with you. It was a tough old time. Not just kind of picking myself up, but picking the team up as well, and making sure that we are ready to move on, because we've got a general election coming up, and we need to make sure that our member of Parliament is hopefully returned to Westminster.
Yeah, we're certainly going to get into that in this episode, that's for sure. But as with all of our guests, I've already alluded to the fact that you've got an Intelligence Corps background, which is quite apt, seeing how close we're here to the former home of the Intelligence Corps at Ashford. But you live in Folkestone, and that's obviously linked to your military career. But tell us a little bit about your military story, where it all began, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Why did you join the army for the first place?
Let's start at the beginning. Uncle Carl, Uncle Roger, Uncle Glyn, back when I was a little boy back in Cardiff, tearing up the streets of Cardiff, making sure that I wasn't getting into any mischief or anything like that, of course. Now, those three people all served, and one of the things that really stood out to me, growing up on a council estate was kind of not much around us, is that they had direction, they had purpose in life. And they would come back of weekends, maybe during holidays and things, and you'd see a kind of palpable change in the way that they were presenting themselves, but also the way that they were kind of approaching life as well. And I looked up to those people, and helped that they bring you a bit of swag back, and you'd have some ammo pouches or a few berries or a few Buckshee t-shirts, to kind of wear about the place and play soldiers in the local woods and all that kind of good fun stuff. So it was kind of always my intention, then having grown up, to join the army, because they were my role models, for want of a better word. And at that time, my cousin Jason, so as I was going through secondary school and kind of looking at, he'd joined the Royal Regiment of Wales, as it was then, and again, he was having a great time. And as you can imagine, for a 16-year-old to see your cousin out having an amazing time, as I thought, in Bosnia, again, inspired me, and I kind of really wanted to make sure that I could, live up to my aspirations, as it were. Now, it helped the fact that he got based in Germany, and what does everyone do when they're based in Germany? He bought himself a Swish car, tax-free. I think that's closed down now. So he comes back home, one weekend with a brand new Porsche. He says, "Come on, get in, let's go for a drive." So obviously not me driving him, but that for me was kind of, I don't want to say the sexy part of the army, but bringing you out of poverty into something which, I don't know, all a bit materialistic maybe, but it was still for me a kind of a motivating factor. So it was always an intention to join, I suppose, the infantry, and I went off and did I think they were called familiarisation visit with the Royal Welsh. I was going to attempt to be an officer at that point, so I went along, did the visit. They take you into the officers' mess. I didn't have a clue what cutlery to use, because it's all laid out in front of you, and I realised at that point, probably not for me. I didn't really fit in with this crowd, but kind of, I suppose, didn't put me off. So then when I eventually went to university, I joined Wales OTC, and again realised quite quickly that these aren't my sort of people.
I was in Wales OTC as well, by the way.
Were you?
Yeah.
Maybe one of the people I thought, these aren't my kind of people.
And we both ended up in the Ink Corps. Weird, eh?
Yeah, really weird. But I was, again, it was always my intention to join the Royal Welsh, and I did my, was it RCB as it was called then. Didn't do amazingly well. They were kind of like, yeah, you know, you've got potential. Come back in a couple of months' time, and yeah, that was it. So I did the first year of uni, and I think then the Afghan war started kicking off properly. And I was thinking, look, you know, I don't want to be at Cardiff Uni. It was a bit boring, to be quite honest with you. I wanted a bit of the action, so went around to the recruiting office and did the old psychometric testing, and they said you've got 3 choices. You can either, I think RMP was like the bottom of the 3, and I was like, no, nobody really likes them, so I don't think I'll join them. The other one was Ammo Tech, and I was like, oh, you know, I kind of like all my fingers and body parts attached, so you know, not going for that one. And then the final one was the Ink Corps. So anyway, I rang my uncle up and said, you know, which of these do you think I should go for? Because, you know, I value their opinions. And my uncle at the time he was 2-para. He was a QM up at Brecon. He goes, right, you've got to go for the Ink Corps. The Ink Corps, I tell you what, it's James Bond type stuff. You'll love it. I mean, you know, when I was out in Northern Ireland, you know, the debt, oh god, you know, sexy stuff. You go for it. You definitely got to join that. So obviously, following his advice, joined up.
At what point do you realise that was not the reality of?
Oh, it's pretty much day one. Exams. Yeah, no, it's you know, look, we did get to do some exciting stuff, but still, and then the rest is history, I suppose. Winchester, Chicksands, and yeah, a few postings.
And you mentioned 2 things there. You mentioned the power of family as a recruiting tool. So I've spoken in the past on this podcast about my own grandfather and that influence. Joining the cadets as another important factor. So that's kind of family factor. And then the other point was Afghanistan and that kind of sense of purpose and that draw, that recruiting tool. And I know that during the Afghan years, the army didn't have to do any adverts because it was happening, being played out before our TV screens, news reports, day in, day out. Do you think that the army faces a bit of a challenge around recruiting from communities like yours that you grew up in Cardiff, working class communities? And is that having an impact on the kinds of people that are now joining the armed forces?
I think you touched on a really important issue there, which is like purpose. So Afghan obviously, you know, kicked off with, you know, the Twin Towers, and I remember being in 6th form at that time, upper 6, and we were, you know, kind of standing there watching that, and I was just thinking, you know, something needs to be done about this. Don't know what needed to be done as a 17, 18-year-old, but something needed to be done. And, you know, eventually it kind of got the better of me, and then that's then why I joined. So it was that always that idea of service, and putting something bigger than myself, but also that idea of escape from, you know, what was a really tough upbringing. And I think you're absolutely right in terms of the forces as a whole has always been seen as a route out of poverty. You know, I don't know why that is, and maybe it gives you structure in your life a little bit more. It gives you a regular pay packet. It gives you self-discipline. It forces you to work in a team, you know, in an environment where you're probably, you know, kind of looking out for yourself and your muckers. That's a kind of natural transition in itself. But you know, I owe so much to the army and the intelligence corps, and you know, this is why I'm so heavily involved now with different organisations that kind of want to give back, you know, not just to veterans but to the military community, the wider family, because I feel like I owe something, because I would not be where I am now if it wasn't for my service, and that's a real key motivator for me.
Perhaps we should then reframe that. Instead of a route out of poverty, perhaps it's a route in to purpose. And that can be seen as a far more positive thing rather than an escape. You know, some of us we've all run away from things at certain points in our life, whether they be relationships or situations we've been or where you're from, and you find those characters in the armed forces. But perhaps it's the route into poverty, into purpose. because it certainly does give you that sense of purpose. And I guess for you, it's never really left you, because perhaps we'll talk about Afghanistan at some stage in this podcast, but that gave us, this generation, a clear sense of purpose. And then you went into teaching. Now, there's very few better purpose-driven roles to teach young people than that. So what does purpose mean to you?
It's the reason you get up in the morning, isn't it? Ultimately, whether it be your purpose that day, or it be your purpose that week, that month, for your life, it's the reason you get up and get moving. So, without purpose, and you see that quite often with people who are going through tough times, they don't know what they want to do. They don't know which direction they want to go in. They'll listen to everybody and take everybody's advice and try and do everything and try and please them, but ultimately not pleasing themselves, which I think is the ultimate thing they should be aiming for. So look, purpose means different things to different people, and I don't think you'll ever you'll nail that answer down. But it's the reason I get up in the morning, which is to make sure that your family is well cared for, well provided for. But then when your pay packet comes in and you've got a bit of spare time in the week, what can you do? What extra can you do? And that's the bit is the giving back, I think, which is so important. And
you do loads of extra, that's for sure.
Too much, I think. Yeah.
I'm sure your wife will tell you that as well.
Keeps me out of trouble, though. I think that's the main. That's another important aspect of that purpose: staying out of trouble.
Yeah. But with Afghanistan, that again, we mentioned that as that recruiting tool, but that clear, defined sense of purpose. A lot of people I've heard on other podcasts, when they talk about our generation, the Twin Towers moment, where the world changed for our generation of soldiers. I think you did a couple of tours of Afghanistan.
So I did, yeah, short tour, and then a longer tour back in Herrick 6 and Herrick 9.
Did you see much change in terms of the kind of purpose, the mission, the nature of that conflict? What changed for you?
It's hard to say, the two very different roles that I did, but in terms of the infrastructure out there, obviously that changed a great deal, and we were very much more embedded. The attitudes, I think, in the military, I think had changed an awful lot as well. We'd gone from going to root out terrorists and make them face justice, to nation building and peacekeeping, or trying to keep the peace, and I think that was the major change that I saw over those two times out there. I mean, the forces as a whole has taken made a huge sacrifice, but I think overall, Afghanistan was an important, I think, campaign for our forces, because it, I think, allowed us to move on from Iraq as well, to an extent, but at the same time it showed a lot of flaws in our structures and our in the way we were geared up for a different type of war, really. So change politically as well, obviously, not just in the UK, but also across the Atlantic as well, and that brought, again, a different dynamic to it. Like working with the Yanks and their kind of view of the world was certainly an eye-opener for me as well. And
with all of that, was there a political thread that was running through you? Were you aware of those sort of geopolitical, domestic political decisions, or are you just cracking on with your job?
I think the nature of the intelligence corps meant I had to be. You kind of had to take those factors on board and be aware of them. But at the same time, you'll know as well, you're just out there with your muckers, and you're getting on with your job, making sure your job's done, so that, for want of a better word, you don't fuck up so somebody dies.
Yeah.
And that's it, isn't it? And that's what war comes down to, isn't it? You look out for the person next to you, to your left and right, and hope you'll make it back. That's it. And I'm not making out that I'm on the front line or anything like that, but I'm thinking that's kind of the ethos, I think.
And fast forward, we then have the withdrawal from Afghanistan, Op Pitting, as it was known. and by this stage, you're heavily involved in the Conservative Party. You're a very well-known activist within the party. You're on the parliamentary candidates list. How is it then to kind of reconcile that Afghan moment and looking back, but as essentially a politician in that sense? I know that you got to, or you might not classify yourself as a politician, but as a political activist for sure, and someone that's very astute and well read into politics. How was it at that moment when the withdrawal from Afghanistan? Did it change your view?
Look, I mean, the whole situation was hugely troubling. Not just because you're seeing civilians and a nation collapsing and falling into the hands of the people you've been fighting for nearly 20 years. That was deeply upsetting. Now, the way that I kind of I say reconciled maybe the say negative press of our own government's inaction, whatever you want to call it, was I looked across the water again to the US and what the decisions that were made there, and that's the kind of starting point of the house of cards falling down, for want of a better word. And so I think Biden has got a lot to answer for on that. I think not having a planned phased withdrawal, making sure that the Afghan forces were prepared and ready to take control of those regions, but also not appreciating the cultural dynamics within those areas as well, and actually thinking, look, you can have an Afghan army, but actually the real power in that region is the local religious leader or the local mullah or the local warlord. They are the ones who are really wielding power there. So all those kind of factors you come in, and then with the deeply kind of troubling human element of seeing people being pushed back off walls as well, and then you just think both of us lost friends out there, and you kind of think, what was it for? If that's the way you're going to withdraw, and that's the way it's going to be, then why did we waste all that time? Why not just let them keep it if that was the end point? So it feels futile, but knowing people who work in the FCO and who were involved in that operation, I know that they were absolutely grafting, and they were balls out, and they were working hard. The political will, I think we really need to separate politicians from the doers of things as well. Yes, they provide the strategic direction, but also they're not the ones actually having to deliver on that personally as well. So look, I don't think I could come to a particular analysis of the whole thing. It still doesn't really make sense to me, which is probably a good intelligence core assessment there.
Yeah, I was expecting the use of the DI yardstick. It's highly, realistic possibility, and but absolutely, I think we pose more questions we've got answers for at the moment, and that's okay. That's all right.
Asking the questions in the first place, I think that's we live in a country where we can do that as well. Which is worth just noting.
Yeah, so I think we still do need to ask those questions as Afghan veterans of that conflict, and come together and ask those of each other, because some don't care. I've got a friend that when I've spoken to him about this, he's quite unemotional about it. I was definitely on the other side of that.
Yeah, I know you were.
I was proper emotional.
I know you were.
Not put in, but so yeah, and that's okay. We're human beings. But Afghan aside, you did decide to leave at some stage. Was there something? Was it a push or a pull moment in terms of deciding to leave the army?
Look, the army did so much for me, and it was a really hard choice. Was it 7 clicks to freedom, or whatever the saying is? I mean, JPA had just come in at that time, and it was relatively easy, actually, the actual physical process. But the emotional side of things was a real kind of real tough time. Actually, and we talk about the push and pull. Yes, all I could see in front of me was 6 months on tour, 6 months preparing for tour, 6 months on tour, 6 month and that was the constant cycle. And you'll know that the corps itself is pretty small. There's only pretty busy, and there's only a finite group of people who actually do deploy as well. So it's with that in front of me, and then wanting to start a family as well, I was just thinking, like, I've got to make a choice here. Better start a family, and I've got 2 beautiful daughters now as a result. So can't really grumble too much.
No. So tell us, how did teaching come into it? How did that fall in?
To be honest, it was a happy accident, I suppose. As with most people, when you left, or when I decided to leave, I probably didn't use my resettlement time as wisely as I should have, finding out about different careers and different opportunities, and all of a sudden it kind of races up on you, and you're like, oh no, right, haven't really got anything to go to. Luckily I had a bit of cash saved away, so could kind of ride it out for a couple of months, and end up moving to Folkestone, which is
posted.
First posting, Shorncliffe. So it ended up just writing to some local schools and just saying, look, I want to get a bit of work experience, so to speak, and one school got back to me out of, I think, maybe 15 in Folkestone. Probably says a lot, actually, but one school got back to me, Cheriton Primary School, so I'll give them a shout out here. And the interesting thing actually was, I went in, met the head teacher, and then she placed me in a class with a chap named Fred James, no relation, but it turned out that he was also a veteran. So he had, I can't remember for the life of me what he'd served in, but he was a primary school teacher, and he said, look, fresh out the army, let me take you under my wing, sort of thing. And he basically gave me all the intel and said, look, don't do this, don't do that, don't say this, kind of all the things that you kind of used to in the army, that would, make you the fun in the mess, as it were. Yeah, don't do that in the staff room of a primary school.
Especially some of our sort of more acquired jokes from the armed forces community.
Indeed, yeah, black humour doesn't go down as well as it should in primary schools, I think. But yeah, and this is why I'm such a huge fan of coaching and mentoring, and when people leave the forces, I just think, whatever job, whatever career they want to go into, pick out where there are some veterans in that industry, and just say, look, can I come and see what you get up to for a day or a couple of days or a week, whatever, right? And that to me just kind of opened my eyes to actually one of the parts I enjoyed in the military was teaching, or standing up and giving briefings, or those sorts of things. I really did enjoy, strangely, and that's exactly what Fred opened my eyes to. And he said, look, it's great fun. Yeah, there's a load of paperwork, but actually you're your own boss in your classroom, and actually you've got a group of 30 young children in front of you who look up to you, and you are a role model to them. And I thought, 30 young children, all about 7 or 8, still laughing at fart jokes and those sorts of things. And I think, that's actually just like being in the army. So went off to teacher training school. In fact, used my enhanced learning credits as it were then, so got a bit of it paid for by the army. Now, university was an experience as a veteran, going into Canterbury Christ Church, one of 10 blokes. I say the only man on the course. The rest were boys, obviously. As a mature student, and it was just tough. I mean, it was a course of 300, and they're just all young, idealistic people who have just never seen the world and passed Magaluf. So it's that was an experience that took all of my resilience and resolve and patience, not to mention the left-wing lecturers.
How did you overcome that? Because that culture shock of being within one, I know in the armed forces we come from all walks of life across the UK, from council estates in Cardiff to state schools in Kent, and public schools and everything in between. But then you're in that university situation, quite alien, and you've gone from that homogenous armed forces family and then into the student world. What kind of tools did you use to overcome that? How did you get through that?
Let's go back to purpose. So actually, at the same time, this chap called David Cameron was Prime Minister. Do you know him? Yeah.
My name rings a bell.
Well, anyway, he came up with this great idea called Troops of Teachers, which I say a great idea, which had been nicked from America, which actually worked really well of inspiring young people with veteran teachers or teachers who are veterans. And, the kind of call came out to, look, have we got any veterans who are teachers, or have we got any veterans who are in teacher training? And, we need people for an advisory board in the Teacher Development Agency, as it was then. So I kind of, put my hand up and I said, look, I'm going through teacher training at the moment. And they kind of called me in and said, went through my experiences, what I'm doing at the moment. Basically talked about exactly what we're talking about now, the kind of troubles and the difficulties you have going to uni as a mature student, but as a veteran, and then why you're getting into teaching. And, that aspect then kind of gave me purpose, as in, yes, it was tough sitting through those seminars and those lectures, knowing that, I'm not only am I getting a...
Radio check.
Not me.
Probably me.
Oh my god, this is so unprofessional. I can't. This is like amateur hour. Unbelievable. Who is it? Unbelievable. I can't believe that, Jonny.
Hilarious.
Like, honestly.
Do you know what? I'm gonna leave that in.
Do you know what? Even
so how amateur this podcast is.
Do you know what? And I put both mine on.
You're getting really deep as well.
I put mine on focus mode as well, and I was just about to actually start embracing and hugging you now. No, but this advisory board, and kind of met up and had a old chinwag and some cakes and some coffees and things. We all of us kind of opened our hearts to the Teacher Development Agency, because about 12 of us. Said how they can improve things, how can make it easy for veterans to to get into teaching. And typical civil service completely ignored all of our advice and did their own thing. And I'm pretty sure it was some civil servant just sat in there thinking, like, this is what veterans will love. They will love going into schools and marching children up and down playgrounds, and
played into the stereotypes.
And this is exactly how we're going to sell it to the public. We're going to have ex-sergeant majors going in screaming at children who have gone off the rails, and do you know what, that'll bring them back into shape. And everybody who's served will know that it's all about collaboration, it's about teamwork, it's about consent.
Yeah.
Ultimately you build relationships with people, which is one of the strongest things I think any veteran has, is the ability to develop relationships with people and kind of get things done, just get things done. And that was my huge kind of annoyance with that, is yes, I'd gone through all this training, and then I get to school and it's narrative of being given out that when I arrive at the school I'm going to be some grumpy old soldier that's going to be shouting at children, and obviously just wasn't the case. Chilled out, having a laugh and a joke, but know exactly where the boundaries are. And that's always been a real strength of mine as a teacher. And that's, I think one of those problems is, yes, I had that purpose going through the university degree, but then it kind of got taken away when I actually then got into schools. Now, luckily, it was replaced with that kind of need to serve your community rather than serve the Teacher Development Agency. But I felt like it was just a hugely, massively wasted opportunity to utilise some massively skilled people up and down the country. And I don't care what cat badge you wore. I think any veteran has the ability to be an amazing teacher, because they've got life experience to share with people. And yeah, I've seen it. It's in the new Veterans Action Plan. I've actually reached out to the department to offer my sage advice, and we'll see whether they come back on that.
So you seem to be on this trajectory towards moving into these decision makers. You had a taste of it there with the Teacher Development Agency. You're now involved in the political circles. Is this your new purpose? This political world, this the policy areas that seem to be driving some of your decision making?
And this is one of the things that actually I think we get wrong in politics is, how do I say this? Politically, I don't care about policy. I care about values, and I care about the things that drive people. And look, policies come and go. Prime example, the troops, the teachers, but the things that stay true from day one to when you leave this world are your values, and they're the things that will that should, I think, give you the outcomes that you want. So look, I stay true to my values. Sometimes your values will fit to one policy but not to another. Sometimes your values will fit with one leader of the party and not another. So within all that, I think policy is a noose to kind of hang yourself with if you stick too rigidly to it. But my values I will stick rigidly to.
Cool. So politics on that subject. You've alluded to it earlier on as well. You've had a pretty tough time in a local election. You are a chairman of a local constituency association, and you very generously shared with me the letter that you sent to your candidates and to your members as the leader of the local association, working alongside an MP, etc. But you took some accountability there, and you said ultimately the responsibility of that failure rested on your shoulders, which I thought was pretty bold and pretty commendable. Quite frankly, and having kicked about politics for a while myself, very rarely do I see that self-reflection and that ability to take responsibility. Do you think that politicians, I mean, first of all, why on earth did you take that approach? Because it's pretty bold. And secondly, why do politicians take responsibility and accountability for their actions these days?
Well, why did I do that? Good question. So I asked myself. I mean, it's actually something that someone leaked to one of these awful local blogs, and you have all the lefties kind of just going, what an arse I am, kind of thing. Look at this idiot, kind of thing. And I just think, do you know what? It probably says more about you than me that you're willing to have a pop at me for taking responsibility. I did it because, there is always, regardless, I think, of you as a person, your position, your role also carries responsibility, and a responsibility not just to the people who you're hoping would vote for you, but also to your members who pay their subs every year. And ultimately, why you're a member of a political party, because you want your values to be the ones which are or your people making the decisions in your local area and nationally. And you're right, nobody stood up and said, this one's on me. And I looked at that and I just thought, do you know what? Someone needs to, and if they're not going to do it, I'm going to do it. And that was it, really.
What's the reaction been like from?
Look, members have been very thankful. Some going, it's not your fault. It's national issues. It's this issue, that issue, and I'm just look. You just can't keep blaming other things. Yes, there are always things that we can do better in campaigns, and one of the things that we're doing now is a kind of post-mortem, saying, look, where did we go wrong? What did we do well? And actually, how can we improve for next time? Which I think is always a very important process in any career industry.
And next time is going to be a general election, right?
There will be, and again, I deeply, really believe that if you're going to put yourself out there as a politician, you have to be willing to lose as well as win. And that to me, people lose badly, and I don't like that. I just don't buy into it. If something's your fault, but if you're responsible for something and it doesn't work as the leader of an organisation, you take responsibility. It's as simple as that. There's no other. Why did you do that? It's just because that's what somebody who's in charge does. Yeah.
Perhaps if only our national politicians took that approach as well, we might.
Deep.
But I get, and not only were you the leader of that organisation in that local election campaign, as the chairman of the association, but you're also a candidate who lost. So you kind of had a double blow there to deal with. So that must have been tricky. But I fully commend the approach that you did. When I saw that email and letter that you'd sent, I thought, wow, I've not seen that too often, to take that accountability.
Well, you're right. I think more should. I mean, what would you have done?
Good question. I would have been the agent hiding behind the scenes.
Blaming the chairman.
Blaming the chairman, because I'm the guy behind the scenes. No, very good question. I would hope to think I would have taken a similar... because I think there's this difference between kind of entitlement and responsibility. This world that we live in, people feel so entitled when they're in positions of power, whether they be MPs, whether they be leaders of corporate organisations, or whether they have military rank. But actually taking responsibility and accountability is true leadership in my eyes. And I just think hopefully we'll see more people become like that, because we've faced a culture where our politicians seem to like to kick the can down the road. And I know that you've been a huge supporter of Boris Johnson in the past, and the way in which he exited politics. And you and I have had discussions about this. I kind of was very, very, very disappointed by Boris Johnson in the end, and I know you stuck by him to the end. But I think we both agree in the way in which he exited the political stage and the way it was decided by the MPs ultimately was not the right way. But one thing I also think that he did wrong is any kind of crisis, there was never this, they love to kick the can down the road for too long.
Yeah.
And that's not what you've done here.
No, look, and also, there were other people working in the association as well that were, doing different jobs. And, if we were to have a true dissection, you could attribute blame if you really wanted to, but it's just,
what's the point on that?
What's the point? I was looking at people in the organisation who were grafting. Yes, made mistakes. So what? Did they make that second mistake, or did they do it again? No, they didn't. They learned from it, and that's important as well. So what I didn't want was them getting the blame. I didn't want people pointing fingers at them, because ultimately, I've asked people to do a job, and maybe I've made decisions in asking them to do that job that weren't right. So again, it comes back to me. So, and especially when you're trying to develop people as well, and you want people to have those experiences of failure. And I think tasting defeat is important. It's one of those things. When people say, you love winning at everything. I don't love winning. I just hate losing. And ask my daughters, playing Monopoly or anything like that. I just hate losing, but I do appreciate the lessons that come from it, and that was again another factor. I wanted to take the sunlight off some other people as well.
Yeah, well, are there any early things that you've identified that you've learnt from?
I think probably the biggest thing for me is, and I'm not passing the blame here, but yeah. I'm simply explaining my thinking is members need to feel loved. They need to feel appreciated. They need to feel listened to, and if they don't, they won't help you. Now, if, for example, we as the Conservatives are selling ourselves as the party of business, which I think is kind of a core mantra of the party, or should be, then why are we raising corporation tax? If we are the party of house builders and giving people the opportunity to own their first home, why are we bending over backwards for NIMBYs? And why are we making it harder to build houses? So those sorts of things upset the members and makes them feel like they're not being listened to, and ultimately then that spills out into apathy.
Okay.
and I think there's political apathy as well, just more generally as well. We've all had a tough time of it recently. Some more than others. Yeah, poor old Boris. And I'll just say on Boris. Let me just say.
I know you're itching.
No. Right. So my position on Boris is has always been one of support, right? But it's a very personal reason.
Yeah.
And I'll disagree on policy, whatever, and I'll disagree on some of his behaviours. But during the COVID crisis, my oldest daughter was very ill. In fact, it was a reaction to COVID, a very rare reaction, and she ended up in intensive care up in Guy's St Thomas. And one of the things that I felt really kind of, not that just lifted my spirits, but lifted her spirits as well, was that she got a letter from Boris saying, I understand that you've been unwell. I stayed at that hospital too. Get well soon. It was just a small gesture, and do you know what? I appreciate it was probably written by some spad in the office who has brought it to his attention, and he signed it off. But that little thing, really lifted her spirits and lifted my spirits as well. So for that, and let's go back to why veterans are great to employ, but also great in politics. It's because they're loyal. If somebody shows you a solid, you can kind of look past some of their flaws. Like I look past your flaws, because we're good chums. But I think that's important too, showing loyalty, and not just kind of going, do you know what, you've messed up. I'm not your friend anymore. I'm not going to talk to you anymore. In fact, I'm not going to back you anymore. To me, it doesn't sit right. I would much rather stay true to the things that again, my values.
Hey, I know I've ribbed you in the past about this, but as you framed it that way, I would not even try and dissuade you. How could I? Because that's
quite heartless if you did.
But yeah, that's a fair one, completely. And there are those small things, those small gestures that go either way, whether they're bad ones or good ones, stay with you, and they're the things that often don't cost money.
No, it doesn't.
As well. And it goes back to your point you've made about making your voluntary base and your members feel loved and thanked and wanted and valued, which is really important. And clearly Boris played an absolute blinder there with you. So I doff my cap to you, Boris.
We'll have to get that as a social media clip, that one.
Blooper. But I was a huge supporter of Boris in the past, and it certainly didn't end up that way. But that's for another episode. But it's about the future, and we're talking about your future in this episode. You've gone from the council estate in Cardiff to a really prestigious court, the Ink Court, and
the finest,
and a tough role to get into. Tours of Afghanistan, teaching, entrepreneurship, failures in local government, learning from those, licking your wounds. What's next for you politically?
I'm just grafting away. I've got to rebuild the association, rebuild the base, make sure that our members are, and those people who have lost their seats, don't feel like they're just being pushed out into the cold. We're a team, we're a family. We need to kind of come together and lick those wounds together to kind of get past that, almost that grieving process of having lost. We're now in opposition, so that's a new challenge in itself. So I'm looking forward to learning the dark arts of.
It's a lot more fun, trust me.
Yeah. Well, from what I gather, and this is obviously what the other parties did in the previous couple of years, is we can just promise anything and we don't have to deliver. I think that's how it works. Right, so we can
that's a creative way of putting it.
So we can pay the streets with gold, and
it's politics, right? No, but on a serious note, it can be far more creative. It's quite good fun being in opposition, both in local government, I've been in a coalition where I've worked as an agent. I've been, in opposition. I've been in government, in local government, and obviously in national government as well, both in a coalition, in opposition, and in government. All different shapes and forms of government. So you'll be able to test and adjust going forward. But no, good luck with that, because as you lick those wounds from that local election, but you're on the parliamentary candidates list as well, and so this journey continues. Is there aspirations next general election or beyond that? So you're still a young bloke.
Thank you. 39. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Look, I'm on the list. I wanted to put myself out there. I wanted to challenge myself. You kind of I don't know. I know maybe I view this wrong, but you kind of look up to politicians. I mean, they are, for want of a better word, role models, and they should be role models. And I don't know, I always kind of thought, and again, this probably comes a little bit down to my mindset and why I am where I am from where I've come from, is I actually looked at, I think, you're no better than me. And my initial kind of motivation, I don't know, maybe poorly placed, was, I want to compete. I think I've got what it takes. I think I'm as good as you, if not better. And, that, for me, was a bit of a motivator, but also the fact that I thought, I think I could probably do a better job than some of you. I was looking at some of these people going, oh my God, how are you in government, or how are you a member of parliament? And thinking, people deserve better, they really do. And I don't know, why that is. The broader political landscape, I think, is full of too many people who have just got on that kind of train from school to university to becoming a researcher, an advisor, a SPAD, then becoming a member of parliament.
Yeah, I think about 19% of parliament is made up of people with those backgrounds.
And I think that's too high. I think parliament, and we look at the veterans who serve in parliament, and they are generally the ones who are upstanding members of the House. They're not ones getting into mischief and getting into trouble and splashed all over the papers. Why? Because they've got a core set of values that they stick to, that they developed in the military. And I think it's important to kind of note the how many intelligence corps members there are in the House too. We've got Flick, got Tom, we've got Bob Seeley, Flick,
and Bob.
We're missing one there, I'm sure. Sarah Atherton.
Yeah, the only female regular armed forces veteran. Obviously, friend of the show, previous guest, along with Bob as well, and Tom, and Flick in this season.
Oh, I'm glad to be in the same season, actually. Also on the Education Select Committee, because I know she's very passionate again about education, and something I've talked to her about. So it's, I think the military naturally, or your background in the military naturally lends itself to politics at whatever level. And actually, we talk about Parliament a lot, but the number of veterans who serve on parish councils, on district borough councils across the country is huge, and there are so many. And I just think these are kind of the unsung heroes of veterans in politics as well, because these guys are day in, day out doing the job, and they're getting on with it, and we hear nothing of them. Why? Because they're not messing up. And that to me is kind of really, really important. And when I was selecting candidates for Folkestone a couple of years back, and we put the committees together, you also know how a selection committee works in a local association, but I made sure that our selection committee had a majority veterans on it, because I knew that Major Keith, Major Bradley, and myself all had similar values, even though they didn't serve in the Glorious Corps themselves. I knew that their values would ensure that they chose the right people and say no to the right people as well. So there are people who are veterans in politics that aren't necessarily elected. They're also in the background doing the important work of making the machine run. So big shout out to them.
And that's why I was keen to get you on the show. Not necessarily to talk about your parliamentary aspirations, because we talk about enough of that on this show, but it's about when things go wrong as well, but all that stuff behind the scenes, the unsung heroes that you've described.
Did I mention you? You were an agent. You were an agent, weren't you?
I was an agent, yeah, behind the scenes. But these people are really important because without that, politics just wouldn't happen. And this is where the main bulk of veterans in their communities can stand up and serve again. And that's really important that we do that. So I think on that positive note, Stephen, we've covered a lot of ground. Thank you so much. Great to finally get on the show. We'll get you on again in the future when you get elected. And look back at this moment as
I'm probably laughing. This will be all the bloopers tape, and this is where the embarrassing moments will come out.
Definitely, I'll be able to sell these clips as well
when your phone goes off as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Cheers, mate. Great to chat.
Cheers.
Bye. Thanks to our guests, and thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, hit subscribe now. Alternatively, you can support our mission by checking out in the show notes below, where you can rate, donate, or become our mate. Thank you.